Now, this presentation you will say is on intergovernmental relations. And I want to tell you right up front, when I do this presentation, sometimes I see eyes sort of glaze over of the commissioners. So what I've done over time is tried to work in some interactive engagement of the people in the process. So you'll have a clicker unit, and in a minute or so I'll have a few slides dispersed through this where I'll be asking you to respond. Now obviously if you've read the presentation in advance, you know the answers to the questions. But if you haven't, I don't want you to look through them, and I'll explain the clicker devices when we actually get involved with them. So we're going to talk a little bit about intergovernmental relations. We'll start just with the clicker. Don't do anything yet. So these are radio controlled. They're state-of-the-art type things. You don't have to point them or anything. So you read the question. When you read the question, so in this one, can I follow directions? So you get to answer it. Okay, I can tell when they have, Becky, you have any idea how many roughly you passed out? So when we get close to 20, it tells me when 20 people have responded. I don't want you to take a lot of time on this, and I'll show you the results. So right now, all you have to do is press the button that responds to the question being asked.
Oh, A?
A for yes, B for no. Okay, so you can do that. And what I can tell right now is that 17 of you have already responded. So you can try again. I've got 18 now. Maybe somebody's not responding, 19. So we're getting close. And I'm going to go ahead, and we got 20 now. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It's close enough. It's just to give you an answer. So I always found it interesting. So this is a classic example of working with county commissioners. So I never know if you can't follow directives or you're being smart aleck, okay? Because 55% of you either didn't read the question or you didn't answer it truthfully. So, but it'll give you an idea how you use those as I go through some questions a little bit further on. So whose responsibility is it in county government to do intergovernmental relations? So I asked the question, is it the elected leaders, the commission staff, is it commissioners, is it staff, is it hard guns or lobbyists, or is it somebody but you don't know exactly who it is? When I ask that question of county commissioners, the response I most often get back, we hire a lobbyist to do that or we pay a staff person to do that. Okay? So the next question I want to ask you, so who has primary responsibility for county-based intergovernmental relations? If you want to answer that on part of your county, go ahead. Now, I need to tell you before you all vote, what's E? If some of you's been in my presentations, what's GOK? Because that's one of your choices. God only knows whose responsibility it is. So you can make that choice if you want to. So everybody answer that question. Who has primary responsibility to do intergovernmental relations? Or if you want to treat it as who has primary responsibility in my county right now doing intergovernmental relations, you can answer in that way. So I've only got 14 responses, 17 now. I'm just going to let it go for a few more seconds so it doesn't drag on. So we're up to 19 again, so we're getting close to that level, and maybe only going to have 19 people vote or so, so I'm going to close it. So 58% of you say it's the commissioners. We got 16% saying the staff, and we got 26% saying all of the above. Okay, so we got a nice mixture. But the thing that's encouraging to see on this is that many of you feel it's the commission's responsibility to be involved in intergovernmental relations. But before we get involved with it, I think we have to define exactly what intergovernmental relations is. What is it? Is it a formal legal arrangement, or is it something else? So last chance to respond to the poll. I've got 17 right now, and I'm going to be closing it. Last chance, closing the poll. So it's false. Okay, 65% of you believe it's false. Well, I'm going to tell you in a little bit, formal legal arrangements can be a part of intergovernmental relations, but it's not the only part. I looked and looked and looked for what I thought the appropriate definition was of intergovernmental relations. I didn't find it. So I defined it myself, and I've used this for years. So here's how I define intergovernmental relations. It's the interaction, the communication, the cooperation and partnership among units of government with minimal or no formal authority over each other that assists them in sorting out relationships for the good of the people and the units of government. Okay? So it's not lobbying. It isn't public relations. You know, there may be some component of that, but it's this concept of interaction, community, and cooperation for benefit of them and the citizens they serve. That's the concept of mine of intergovernmental relations. So there's formal. Let's talk about formal. All of you probably have formal agreements. Mutual aid, joint service agreements, service contracts. I don't know really of any county in Florida that doesn't have one of those things. So you have formal intergovernmental relations, but you also have informal. So one of the benefits of being involved in the class is not always the speaker just talking to you about it, but also some interaction among you. So how many of you, just by a raise of hands, have some very significant process in your county where you serve as a liaison to another group in your county? You know? Okay. So let's go over here, Commissioner Spicer. What's Nassau County? How do you do it in Nassau County?
Well, the board normally puts one of our fellow commissioners on whatever.
So they appoint you as a representative. So that would be with the county or cities and municipalities. How broad and encompassing is the boards that you're talking about?
Well, the Board of County Commissioners in Nassau County, they just recently put me on workforce. They put me
Workforce development.
Yes.
Okay.
And Northeast Florida Regional County.
Okay. So the planning council.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have different arrangements? Anybody have liaison responsibility? What do you have with Commissioner Kitchen?
We are appointed by the chairman and the vice chair to specific committees like tourist development, airport liaison.
Okay.
In my capacity, I'm also with Eglin and Hobart Air Force Base.
Okay.
So a lot of chamber of commerce. We each have a chamber that we're responsible for. So it's community as well as larger
Okay.
the entities.
Yeah.
Our county is almost set up like that, but like I'm the chairman of public safety in Manatee County.
Uh-huh.
Courts, state attorney, sheriff, and commissioner is the chairman of that committee. So I am the chairman of public safety in Manatee.
So does that mean you're a liaison with the Citizens Advisory Group to public safety or stuff like that?
They're part of the committee.
Okay, they're part of the
They're
committee.
part of the committee, all judicial and pre-trial, you name it.
Okay. So again, yes, Commissioner Mattis?
Difference between the chairman appointment and the liaison. For instance, like our chairman appoints different commissioners to different things. Like you might be a part of she might appoint you to the Economic Development
Yeah.
Council, a member of that, or she might appoint you to the Public Safety Coordinating Committee. Versus our commission sending 4 of us to an intergovernmental meeting with the city because we're part of CRA.
Right.
Is there a difference between the two?
So yeah, so my perspective is it's something outside your elective responsibilities that brings that collaboration and partnership and acknowledgement of what each are doing. So there's not a whole lot of differences. Most counties that I'm aware with, they'll have joint meetings with the municipalities in there, and it's a whole board function. At the same time, whether it's workforce development or fairgrounds relocation or animal shelter or something, there's a lot of advisory boards, there's different things going on. A lot of counties appoint a specific commissioner, and it can be done by the chair, or sometimes the commissioners express their own interest. I would like to serve that, so you interact with each other in their functions on a more formal basis without any formal arrangement.
Now, I'm a liaison with affordable housing, but I don't run the meeting.
Right, and you don't have to run the meeting. You got to be there representing. Well, I'm here from the Board of Commissioners. I need to hear what you're on your priority list and stuff like that, Commissioner.
Greater Osceola Partnership for Economic Prosperity, so it's an umbrella organization.
That's the group I talked to, right?
With representation
Yeah.
from the county, the 2 cities, and then we have separate subcommittees underneath that, and one doesn't control over the other.
Right, and I think the day I was there, the county administrator from Osceola was there that day, or maybe it was the assistant administrator. So it's that reach out. So to me, it goes beyond the formal. So maybe a chair appointment is more formal, but there's an interaction between all the groups going on in the county, because I find out that there's a lot. And one of the things, if you remember back to the new commissioner orientation I talked to you about, is the management of your time. So you got all your board activities and your board meetings and your board workshops, and you got all these other things you're being asked to do. Remember the question I asked you, how many of was going to do the job as a county commissioner just as part-time? How many of you are doing it as part-time county commission? Just raise your hand. How many is doing it part-time? We got about 2. 3? Well, do you remember how I defined what part-time was as a county commissioner? I'm asking a lot of you to remember back a month ago, or a year ago. But I said, all right, well, does that mean you're working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. as a commissioner, or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. as a commissioner? Because what we find is that most people, that when they're newly elected, most of them think that they're going to do this as a part-time job. And a lot still do, but it ends up being more 50-50 than rather than 90% who thought it was just going to be a part-time function. And so, it's a humongous task you have at hand. So if you've read ahead, you already know. What do these numbers mean to you? Just look at them. Do they mean anything at all? If you looked ahead, you know the answer. If you haven't looked ahead, most people say, I have no idea what that means. That's my Christmas tree of Florida intergovernmental relations. And if you look at the next slide over, you'll get some idea as to who those are. So remember, 1 started at the top of the list. So, the governor is part of your intergovernmental relations. Especially if you need a special act or something, you need his signature on it, or you need him to push it from the executive side. You got 2 houses in the Florida legislature. We got 2 U.S. senators. How many of you do your counties try to interact frequently with like Nelson and Rubio? Because at the federal level, aren't you trying to capture some of the funds and economic development and all that stuff's going on? Well, a lot of counties interact with those folks. You got to interact with the leadership in the legislature. We've got the 4 members of the cabinet I talked about. We got 5 water management districts. You got 5 constitutional officers. By my last count, you got 10 regional planning councils, and they're all existing, but the funding is gone from the state level, which is a great example. And I know the counties have pitched very hard that that they want to encourage those to continue and be funded. But I believe the governor's vetoed it the last 2 years in a row. It was actually in the budget 3 years in a row. It was actually in the budget last year, and he vetoed it again. You got. I'll show this a little bit later on. So you got the number of state agencies. You have 25 executive offices of the governor. Okay, that's limited by the Constitution. So you got to stay in contact with those people. With the federal representatives, you got 27 in total. With the 2 S senators, you got 25 representatives. You got 40, and I think you know what that is, but if you don't, I'm going to talk about that later. You got 67 counties and school boards. You got 120 something else. This number changes a little bit. You have 411 of something, which is a significant number, and I'll ask you that later. We're going to talk a little bit about special taxing districts in Florida. The last count, and these numbers are starting to get 4 or 5 years old, was over 1,500 of them in Florida. And that's a lot. And I think that caught the attention of the governor 2 or 3 years ago, and he's been looking at it, and they're finding a lot of those aren't active. And then I've got another one of those GOK categories, these governmental advisory boards and members. Nobody has any idea. Is there any county in here that's got less than 2 advisory boards in their county? Anybody's got less than 5 advisory boards in their county? Because there's a library advisory board, and there may be a public health and safety advisory board. There may be a health and human services. I mean, everybody's got advisory boards, and they love it when a commissioner is there. I used to say, and I hope I can remember this, people care that you know as a county commissioner, but they want to know that you care. So I try not to get involved too much. When I can help, I can. But Alachua County asks me occasionally, and when I say occasionally, I'm talking 5 or 6 times, to be on an advisory board or a committee they appoint. Guess what I always notice? There's usually a commissioner appointed to it. Guess what happens when the commissioner doesn't show up, or over a process that takes you 10 months. He shows up for one meeting and said, no need to have a lot of discussion. The train's running down the track. Are you going to get on board? Are you going to get run over? What do you think the people who are on those advisory boards think? Nothing real positive, I tell you, because I've sat on them. But there's a lot of those in Florida counties, and they can help you sometimes in securing funding and different things like that you need. Even intergovernmental relations, this came from the South Carolina Association of Counties. No governmental entity can afford to operate in a vacuum. Effective intergovernmental relations are no longer an option. It's a necessity if counties are to provide services to citizens in the most efficient and effective manner. So my question is, and you get to answer this one, the state of Florida strongly supports intergovernmental relations. Yeah, that's a yes or no answer. So pick up your device and just punch yes or no by the A or B category as quickly as you can. Okay, so we're consistently getting 19 responses, so that's what I'm going to go with, and I'm going to close it. And the answer to that is yes. Okay, there's one setting over there. That's okay. That's what I used to think. And I used to be involved with this group, and actually they asked me to do a lot of things for them, and I worked with them a lot in the 80s and 90s. But there was a advisory council on intergovernmental relations. It was renamed the Legislative Committee on Intergovernmental Relations in 1996, and it had some responsibilities. It was housed in the legislative branch of state government. It has statutory authority. It served as a forum for discussion and study of intergovernmental problems. It evaluates the relationships among local, regional, state, interstate, and federal agencies. You can see what it did. Guess what they did in Florida? They wiped it out. They gave some of the responses they were doing to economic and demographic research, EDR, which is housed in the legislature. Amy Baker is the chief economist for the state, so she supervises some of this, and then it went away. What was important about this Legislative Committee on Intergovernmental Relations, or that existed? It had state representation from the House and Senate. It had county representation from Florida counties. It has municipal representation. They met on an occasional basis. It wasn't a monthly meeting or anything, but guess what? You had state legislators, county commissioners, you had municipal commissioners, and some other people all sitting in the same room talking about what's the big problems, where are we struggling, where do we need special studies to figure out what's going on, where do we find out how other states are doing it more effectively, and that was wiped out. So it's no longer there. So while clearly critical importance, in my impression, when you do something like that, it doesn't indicate that there's a huge degree of cooperation. And then it's been interesting over a period of time, and I'll not do this, and so you can raise up your hands if you want to. How many of you do you think there's a lot of cooperation between the Florida legislature right now and Florida county commissioners, Association of Counties? How many thinks there's a lot? One? Okay? Because what I keep hearing is why is there this gap between what we're saying we need and where the priorities, and why are the legislatures doing this? Okay? And that's an issue that's become bigger over time as I've worked with the Association of Counties, not smaller. Okay? It's really interesting. And if you ever want to have an interesting discussion, and I always forget, do we have any people who've been a state representative or senator in the room? Because there's several now back who are county commissioners who's been state representatives, and you've had several former county commissioners who are current representatives. Have a discussion with them to figure out and talk to them about what have they learned. They all have the experience here. They're part of the presence up in Tallahassee now in the legislature, but things don't change a lot. Okay? And then it's always been interesting to me, the legislators who've come back and been Florida county commissioners, they said, man, this is a way tougher job than us. Everybody can find me. Everybody knows where I'm at. There's a lot more rules and restrictions. There's a lot more people you have to keep up with. There's a lot more people you have to interact with than you do as a legislature. But if you want to have an interesting discussion sometime, find one of those people and ask them some questions. So I think intergovernmental relations is important. It's necessary. It's a formidable task. But I think in reality, you have to ask yourself, where does it fit in your priorities as a commissioner? So let's have about 3 minutes of open discussion. And I'll take volunteers first, otherwise I get to point out who I want to answer the question. Where does intergovernmental relations fit in your priorities based on all the things you have to do as a county commissioner? Who wants to volunteer? David?
I'll volunteer. 'Cause
Okay.
I run to Tallahassee a decent amount. So, if it's a decent amount, because sometimes I run up, with county stuff, and then other times I've ran up just personally. Last time I was up there, I was with our UFIFAS gentleman. We left at 3 o'clock in the morning. We got home at midnight that night, and I think I saw 16 or 17 different legislators that day. So it was quite effective, but
So,
we try to cram 2 days into one, but it's a little bit of work.
So going up to Tallahassee is a task, basically with some folks the size of the state, and to do it many, many times over the time the legislature is in session is pretty formidable. You have to remember committees start a lot before that. We got early start of the session because of the presidential election year, and that's why you ever see something of awards recognition they give at the Florida Association of Counties, that presidential award, the advocacy award, those are people who are spending a lot of time helping in Tallahassee. David?
Everyone's doing it. If you're going up when they're in session, you went up too late. You need to be seeing your legislators at home in their home districts outside of that, because if you're going up on whatever issue you are, you go up by the time they're in session, they give you 15 minutes to a half hour. Well, they're seeing 20 other people that day. You're too late. But that you go up to reinforce stuff up there. You try and lay the groundwork while they're back home.
And just remember, during that whole process, and these aren't exact numbers, but guess how many bills are introduced typically at the start of a legislative session? Between 2,000 and 2,500 usually. How many make it even through the committee process? Maybe 200 and 250. How many of you actually make it to the floor for a vote? 125, 175. Okay, so you're against monumental odds, and their attention isn't as focused. Where does it fit on somebody else's priority list? Commissioner Kitchen.
I'm very involved with my state legislators.
What about at the local level, your liaison with other boards and all those?
Also with the mayors and the council.
Ki-
And we have a lot of different municipalities. And I serve on a lot of different League of Cities, and I talk to them on a regular basis, listen to their screams about being double taxation, try to figure out ways to build better bridges for us. We really do.
If I
Transportation.
If I ask you, just ad hoc, and it doesn't have to be precise now, how much time do you spend that? Is it a couple hours every week, 4 hours a month? Or if you just reflect a little bit, how much
10
time?
hours a month.
10 hours a month,
I'm
okay?
just guessing. I'm
Okay, and that's reasonable. Commissioner Greer?
Yeah, one of the things I do, locally, I stay in touch constantly with the commissioners from the two cities. Some I have a better relationship with.
Uh-huh.
I also do a quarterly breakfast with the county manager, the city manager from the city of Kissimmee. I will be with the new, St. Cloud is a new city manager, used to be the previous, and the school board elected official from my same district.
Okay. How about somebody from a small county responding to that? Do you want to do it from Gilchrist? What's your intergovernmental?
We have a good relationship with our representative. He comes to our county. A lot of them don't come, like federal and that, they don't want to come to Gilchrist County.
So are you talking about Representative Yoho? Or are you talking about the state legislature?
State.
Okay.
State representative.
Okay.
And state senator. They come to Gilchrist County.
Okay.
We're important to them, even though they have part of Alachua County where it makes us feel like
So,
we're important to them. We can tell them what we.
Are you a liaison to other groups as a representative for the board? Okay, so there's not the formal arrangement as there is in some others. And you wanted to respond to, what's your response?
I think you almost do it every day.
Okay.
When you're in a small community and you're out and about, you're running into different people, and I think the conversations, all the time there.
Yeah. So the real challenging part, though, isn't it? You've got so many things you have to do, and we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow. And they range from those ceremonial things. One thing we find, and we poll the Vance County Commissioners, this is what you thought when you got elected. What's the difference in the reality since you've done it? What did you wish you did differently, and things like that. And the time commitment, if you do all the functions you're sort of signed, is overwhelming, isn't it? It's really can become overwhelming. And that's the important part. So you really run into this thing of having to make choices. And tomorrow I ask you, and I know everybody, you know, I'm not at your guys' level, but I probably get invitations to do something every night during the week. You know, I have real problems with my weight because I get more dinner invitations than I need to accept, and you just can't do them all. So you have to fill them in. So you've got legislative authority, you've got quasi-judicial authority, you got budget authority, you got all this stuff, you got ceremonial duties, you have certain things you have to do in your county, and then you got intergovernmental relations. Okay? And so it's really tough on the time allocation and where you place priorities on those. So in your county, do you say intergovernmental relations is a high, middle of the road, or a low priority? And be truthful. You know, think of how you allocate your time a week, a month, and where does that fit in the time allocation? Is it low? Is it in the middle, or is it high? Commissioner Maddox?
I live in Tallahassee.
Yep.
And to be perfectly honest with you, if it's not involving intergovernmental relations with the city, it's very, very low. I was just talking to Jack about it, and I feel like I should be doing more across the street. I mean, I have a good relationship with my delegation. They have a decent relationship with me, but when it comes to actually going across the street, being in the meetings, and advocating on behalf of my county, in the past, it's been very low. But since I've gotten involved with FACT more, I've probably been over there more for FACT than I have for Leon County. But we have a very good lobbyist, we have very good staff.
Sure.
We just rely on them so much.
Sure.
That we don't actually go across the street ourselves.
Yeah.
And do it.
So you may want to say it's a medium priority in my county. You know, you're doing that. Yes.
Yeah, we went to single-member districts, and
Yeah.
I make it my business to get to every homeowners association
Yeah.
meeting in my district.
Which is a lot different.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm an alderman.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack.
Well, and whatever you can do to improve the relationships, I'd say is critical, because you don't have to be around very long to look at the legislation that comes down the pike to realize that there's a lack of understanding many times from the state legislators about the impact that the bills are having on county government. And so when you befriend them, when they trust you and they listen to your voice, it will help the county, because a lot of the problems we're trying to solve in the county is best to be resolved in Congress.
Right. So the one thing that's interesting to me in the discussion is we concentrate a lot on the state, and obviously the state's important. Let me ask you, and I want you to think at a lower level, how many people does it take in your county to make life miserable for you, or as miserable as a board? It takes one who's committed, right? One who is committed and who will come and come and come and come and get others. That's all it takes. So while we concentrate at the higher level, and we do it at the federal and the state, it's equally important and maybe critically as important to do it at the local level. Okay? And so just keep that in mind. I see we've got responses for this one, and basically about 50% of the people say high, but we still got 1 in 5 who say it's sort of low. And that's understandable because it's an overwhelming amount of work. What I want to do very quickly now is go through and try to point out a little bit about why it's important. So we talked about the governor and the cabinet. I'm going to name him again. So it's Governor Scott, Chief Financial Officer Atwater, Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services Adam Putnam, and Attorney General Pam Bondi. That's the cabinet in Florida, 4 people. By statute or constitution, they have a huge list of responsibilities. And I've got some of them listed here. So you can see there's a State Board of Executive Clemency. What does that mean? Hey, you can go to them and ask for a pardon or a release, and they get to decide. Why is that important? That restores certain rights to those people. Now that may not be critical for you, but then let's go on down. So they're responsible for the Department of Law Enforcement. Why might that be responsible, or why might that be an important issue to stay up with the governor and cabinet on? What's the responsibility of Florida Department of Law Enforcement? They're to investigate. So if you have a problem in your sheriff's office, and I don't want anybody to think I'm picking on the sheriff, usually what happens? Who comes in and does the investigation? Department of Law Enforcement, okay? Because of Florida and its coastal areas and stuff like that, sometimes we have some problems with bales of stuff floating in, or white powder, or transportation across county lines. Guess whose responsibility to coordinate and work with counties on that is? Department of Law Enforcement, okay? So it's really critical, you know, if you have a need, you need to be with them because they're the person who controls it. Department of Revenue, it goes on and on, of different responsibilities that they have. State Board of Administration, they look and manage the assets of the state pension fund, various trust accounts, debt service. You see FDLE there. Comprehensive planning, they have some responsibility for the state. The one that I pointed out this morning and is highlighted there in blue, they resolve disputes relating to budgets of county sheriffs and property appraisers. Okay? And on the sheriff's office, they get final say. So, that's a reason to keep up with them. Okaloosa may have been an issue if there's ever a change in military base reuse. So Cecil Field changed in the Jacksonville, Duval County area. Guess who has responsibility? Say, well, I think we ought to consider closing this base or using it for alternative use. It's the governor and the cabinet in instances. So you can go on and on. They're responsible for protecting the natural resources and environment of the state. They consider petitions to establish, amend, or contract community development districts. Community development districts is one of the largest number of districts in the state of Florida. They have to have a size of at least 1,000 acres. Board of Trustees, the Internal Improvement Fund, that has some sovereignty over submerged lands. That was a big issue in Florida a decade ago. Was this creek ever navigable? Because if it is, it belongs to the state. It's the mean high water line. Okay, so there were a lot of arguments going on. They did that. So they have a lot of responsibilities. I just want to point out, so do any of you directly as a commissioner have any contact with the governor's office or his staff? You do? Okay. Anybody else? Can you tell me your experience? Governor Scott's been in now for a while. He's starting his second term. What do you notice if you have interaction and contact with the people in the governor's office?
They've been very responsive to me.
Okay. Are they the same people?
No.
Okay. So one of the things, and it's pretty hard to see, and I just pulled this out, but this was the office of the way the Governor Scott had it organized in 2011. So you can actually see these are the organizational chart and who was responsible in all those areas. But what you'll find over time is that organizational chart of the governor's office can change a lot. And the people change even more frequently, okay? So if we look at that over history, and it looks like it's becoming a little bit more streamlined, so you can see in 2013, and you have to remember there were some issues going on with the lieutenant governor there. And you know, when we started this in 2011, the lieutenant governor was up here and there was about 4 people and 4 different responsibilities, and now there's nothing. That may have been the time we were actually without a lieutenant governor for a while. Most people don't realize it. I was talking with Commissioner Kitchens about it during the break. So the lieutenant governor in Florida doesn't have a whole bunch of responsibility. His primary responsibility is to do whatever the governor tells him to do, and if the governor dies or becomes incapacitated in office, he's second in line in succession. Other than that, he's a freelancer on whatever the governor wants. Okay, but what you're going to find in trying to work with the executive office of a governor, they are going to change a lot. So this need to establish this personal relationship, and let's go to 2014 and you see how it sort of changed again and how the organizational structure has changed. Now, one of the things I noticed when you have your legislative days in Tallahassee, I've seen many a commissioner and I said, well, what you got planned for the rest of the day? I'm going to go visit with the governor. So what I usually do in the afternoon, I don't make trips to see certain legislators. I know a lot of people inside the Capitol. I go visit them, and then usually I sit outside the door for an hour or so and just see what's going on. And then I'll see the commissioners coming out. And I say, how did the meeting go with the governor? Well, we didn't get a meeting. They sent in 2 25-year-old people who knew nothing. Yeah. Okay? But there's a good chance that you have to go through the staff and the key staff to even get to the governor. So those staff become important. So it's just not, you got to have intergovernmental relations with the governor, you got to have intergovernmental relations with that staff who changes on a consistent basis. Okay, now the other thing to recognize in this, where do a lot of people go when they leave the governor's office?
That's what I was gonna say, even though you form those relationships, they end up in key positions.
Key positions. And you know, right now, the recent trend is where have some of them ended up? As heads of the water management districts. Okay, I think there's 3 former key staff members in the office over the last 2 or 3 years that are head of water management districts now. So these relationships are critical. I've tried to identify, I've had this conversation with Ginger, so I went in and like I told you, the Florida Constitution limits the number of state agencies to 25. But when I go in and identify state agencies that are part of the executive office of the governor, there's more than 5. And I think part of it's because they're quasi. These things aren't constant either. So if you went in and you were commissioner 5 or 10 years ago, we had a Department of Community Affairs. What happened to Community Affairs? Went away. And it sort of got glumped into the Department of Economic Opportunity. And that's an interesting one because there's a key head of the Department of Economic Opportunity, but the president of Enterprise Florida is also key to that and sort of serves as a quasi Secretary of Commerce in Florida. So there are a bunch there. Look at all the areas you have to stay involved with, and it goes on down. So Enterprise Florida is identified there. Visit Florida is identified there. So, you know, you need to remember, and let's take Visit Florida. So they need funding, and they need funding to do what? Try to attract people here. And what do those people do? They bring in new dollars and spend them, and you hope you sell them a lot of stuff, and they go back home, and it makes your economic pie grow. Okay? But they're spending a lot, and we're approaching the $100 million a year. I always tell people, and this is an offside, and it's a joke, that tourism is an agriculture industry. Do you know why tourism is an agriculture industry? Well, I say it's a part of the dairy industry. We're not milking cows, we're milking 100 million people for every penny we can get. Okay? So, but those are important issues. Don't you want to get some of the advertising? Osceola County, you want to get some of it, those people who come into Disney World and all those places in Orange County? And part of Osceola County. And so people like getting it. How many of you have tourist development councils in your county? See, almost everybody. So it's important to you. There's no doubt about it. People and committees change constantly, just like in the executive branch, the people change constantly. I'm going to ask you some questions again as a quick poll. How many state senators in the Florida legislature? So we're either slow responding or we don't know. So if you don't know, you might as well just make a guess. So we've got 14 responses. 15, I'm going to close the poll here. We don't want to delay this process a bunch of time. I got 17 now I'm up to, so I'm closing it. So we got 59% who said 40. So the good news is 6 out of 10 of you in here knew the correct answer. Okay, 4 of you didn't. So why is that important? And this is the point I try to get across. So we've talked about this in more detail in the advanced class, and I actually did some work for them, going back and finding it up. There's basically 7 counties of Florida, where slightly more than 50% of the House of Representatives is the sole representative or a partial representative for that county. So if I'm in Broward County and I want to get something passed and it needs to go through the legislature, say on the tri-rail system, guess what? The person who represents Okaloosa and the person who represents Gilchrist and the person who represents Citrus in the legislature, their vote counts as much as anybody else's. And so it's not a process as I just got to influence my only legislators, which that helps. But there's a lot more who have an equal say in the process if it gets out of the legislature. So there's 20 people associated with that, and this is what David was talking about earlier. So the picture up on top is who? That's the current Senate President, Andy Gardner, right? Who's the picture below? That picture below is the designated Senate President starting in 2017 after the end of this session. That's Joe Negron. Okay, and you saw the big fight and discussion that had gone on between Latvala and Negron, and so they got that settled last week. So they already know, assuming they can ever get Senate districts drawn, and we know who's going to be representing those areas at that point in time, is that Negron is going to be president and Latvala is going to be in charge of appropriation. Okay? So you've got some knowledge there in advance. So obviously those people sort of control what goes on in the Senate, right? They have final say if it makes it or it doesn't make it, if it can go to the floor, if it can go to rules or whatever the situation might be. So right there on that page, I've given you all the committees as well. So look at all those committees you may need to visit with or talk to or influence. And again, the job can become a little overwhelming. And it goes on because there's select committees and joint committees and all kinds of stuff. I'm going to ask the question. So the poll is how many state representatives? So we got 14, need a couple more people. We've got 16 now who's done it. I'm not going to delay the process. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We're up to 18. And on this, we got 56%, so we're again in the same boat. There's 120 state representatives in Florida. Okay? So 6 out of 10 have knowledge. Again, it's the same process with them as it is with the Senate. There's a bunch of committees, and we talk about them, but they also have staff. And that's the thing that's a little bit unusual. So you saw, and it's been a long time ago, but let me give you a comparison of Indiana and Florida, my experiences with state government. In Indiana, they have a legislative session. It's a biannual budget process, though. They meet for a short term. There are a number of days on the clock, so it's very similar to Florida. But what they don't is they do not have permanent year-round staffing. They have something called the Indiana Legislative Services Agency. It's got a professional staff in there. When the legislature's in session, those employees are assigned to committee representatives. Some of the larger committees like Finance and Taxation have a permanent director. They work year-round. How's the situation in Florida? Legislative committees are staffed year-round. Activity in Florida. Indiana, you would catch so much grief when I was up there as a legislator if you had to have a special session. What special session are we on this year? You know, I lose track. We have so many special sessions in Florida. So it's a whole completely different complex. Where it points out, do you realize that little old state house in Florida is in front of the big wings and the big tower that looks funny and all the buildings they did? State government in Florida was housed in that building, including the House and Senate, until the 1970s. Look at the size of it now, okay? So it's a monumental task keeping up with all those things that's going on in Tallahassee. Again, you have to know the people, you have to know the committees. Who's the top person there? Chris Foley, right? He's the current speaker. Who's the one below? Speaker-elect Richard Corcoran. Right? Is that right, Corcoran? Is that how he pronounces it? Okay. So these are going to be the influential people. Okay? And what you got to realize is while the current speaker or the current president, you know, they have control, you know, there's some feed back and forth. And usually the designate future speaker or Senate president has a significant role as well. So they sort of have their hands on the legislative process and what goes forward, or maybe even some of the lack of the legislative process and what goes forward. Again, you have all the committees. You heard David went up. You know, he goes up frequently to Tallahassee. He's involved in probably those committee hearings as well as trying to influence the choices that they're making. He may be testifying at some of the committee hearings and stuff like that. He brought up an interesting point, and I've said this ever since I worked in state government in Indiana. If you wait until the legislative sessions start, it's too late. Their attention isn't there. So it's a year-round process, and you need to keep up with those people year-round. So again, the committees, though, go on there forever. So the complexity of intergovernmental relations in Florida, I hope, just as the state level is starting to come a little clearer. So the question is, incorporated municipalities represent the largest group of your intergovernmental partners. Were you paying attention up front? Is that yes or no? So incorporated municipalities represent the largest group of your intergovernmental partners. Is that just a yes or no answer? I've only got 10 responses. Be brave. You got a 50-50 chance of getting this one right. I've got 15 responses. I'm just going to give it. We're up to 17. I'll give the last call. I'm going to close the poll. We got 18. So if you're a university professor and you give a multiple choice test and there's only 2 and it turns out 50-50, what does that mean? Most people don't have the foggiest idea. You know, there was a lot of lucky guessing. So the answer to that question is yes, they are the largest. Because in Florida, and it varies around a little bit, there's about 411 to 412 incorporated municipalities. Okay? And so it ranges from Alachua to Zolfo Springs. So we really cover A to Z. Guess what? That number hasn't been decreasing, it's been increasing. And what's funny is when we talk about incorporated municipalities, we have to remember that some of the large growth areas in Florida aren't even incorporated municipalities. So do we have anybody in here from Sumter County? Okay. So Sumter County's had this little development over time. It's called what? The Villages. It really actually spreads over Sumter, Marion, and Lake. It covers portions. Most of it's in Sumter. Guess what? The Villages are unincorporated. They're not even incorporated. You know, so they stretch. Population is growing in Sumter County from a small county number of below 50,000 to well over 100,000. I think I'm correct, David. If I'm not, tell me. But in Sumter County, the Villages is such a large unincorporated area, it has a major influence on all 5 seats on the Sumter County Board of Commissioners.
I think that's true there. It's got slight influence here in Marion County. We got only 10% of it.
Yeah, but it's huge. But we're not even counting places like that. You may have noticed, using Sumter County as an example, the Villages is an important stopping point for a certain party and certain people in Florida, isn't it? Okay? And there's a whole history that we won't go in. So Celebration, is that Osceola? Is Celebration Osceola? You know, it's not an incorporated community. Ave Maria, that's a new development by Monahan. He used to own Domino's Pizza down around Naples, not incorporated. There's a new area going in on north of Okeechobee, or maybe it's in the far eastern part of Osceola, but it's called the Grove Special District, ranged by a certain former Florida senator. Now look at the degree of complexity. So if I'm in Broward County, you were saying you're in Broward County, 31 different municipalities. Talking about intergovernmental relations nightmare. Miami-Dade 33, Palm Beach 37, Pinellas 24. Thing that always surprised me when I looked at this, Hillsborough County only has 3, which means most of those are in the unincorporated area. And then you get down to a lot of the smaller counties. So you get to Jefferson, guess what? It's probably Monticello and that's it, okay? Osceola only has 2, even though they're a large area and they're probably going to get larger. If you want to see an interesting map sometime, start in the northern part of Osceola County and see what it looks like, okay? Then blow it out so it's the whole county in the northern part and see what it looks like, because it's different. But if this development is coming, this business growth is coming, it's obviously going to be, an area gets bigger. There's going to be an opportunity for those people when they form these little groups, they could try to incorporate and become a municipality, and it goes on. But there's a huge difference there. But trying to keep up with 37 different communities that have all different ideas and goals, or may have different ideas and goals than you, is really tough. Broward County is a 7-commission board or 9? 9. Okay. And what you'll find in some of these big counties, Dade County, I think, is 15 commissioners down there. So you get somewhat larger commission sizes there. I think Pinellas is 7. So there's a huge difference. There's a lot of people who have intergovernmental relations with. This is the part I was talking about. Most people don't care if it's the city of Ocala's responsibility or Marion County's responsibility. If the road doesn't work, it's your fault. If the school system isn't doing right, it's your fault. You know, I find out, so we've been doing some work around our house. We have a lot of contractors going on. They asked me what I do. And I said, well, I work for the university, and I go out and I do training for people all across the state on a variety of issues. But I do a lot with the Association of Counties. Yeah, they really gripe me off, you know, the library doesn't work. Or, you know, my kid's not getting along in school and the superintendent's crazy. I said, well, you know, you're talking to the wrong group. County Commission doesn't, well, no, the County Commission, they need to get it corrected. You know, and that's sort of it. I mean, when do you get a lot of calls when the tax bills goes out? Because where does it come from? The blank county tax collector, right? Okay, or it goes when your property appraisal comes out. The property appraiser, it goes blank county, Gilchrist County, Osceola County, Citrus County, wherever it might be. When they see the word Citrus County, do they think of the school board? Nope. Do they think of something else? Nope. Who gets the calls? It's County Commission. Okay? So you got to remember, it's constituent services. Part of intergovernmental relations is that you have this seamless transition, you work for the good. So common issues, interests, and problems between cities and counties are enormous. I identified a few: transportation and transportation systems, public safety. Anybody in here have a combined, one combined police force in your county if you've got incorporated cities? Okay, so there are some places in the world, believe it or not, there is not a city police force. So like Gainesville's interesting. We got the University of Florida police force, we got the City of Gainesville police force, and we got the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. Okay, so we got 3 groups. Now they did go back several years ago to a combined communication services, but they didn't even used to do that. Okay? But you think about the complexity and how you might duplicate or overlap services. Is there a better and efficient way to do it? Government finances, infrastructure, you know, land zoning. So if there's a big issue, and again, you know, the Deseret Ranch one is, but Plum Creek, which is one of the largest landowners in the state, is trying to get the city of Hawthorne, which is a small incorporated area east of Alachua County, to annex their land into the city, because the way I read it is it would be less cumbersome for them to do the future development than to deal with Alachua County. Okay, that's interesting because that development is obviously in Alachua County. That development has impacts on roads, police services, all those type things, right? So it's something that groups need to be talking about and visiting about. Let's talk a little bit about special districts. And this is interesting. This always is a little confusing to me. Special districts are similar to counties and municipalities. Special districts are units of special purpose government as opposed to units of general purpose government. Florida's laws generally, though, treat them alike. So I'm asking a question. There are 3 types of special districts: benefit, taxing, dependent, and independent. Is that a true or false? Again, just remember, you got a 50-50 chance. So there's 3 types of special districts. So only 13 people have responded, 15. Last chance to press your buttons, up to 17. I'm going to close the poll. And so we're a little bit higher on true than false. So again, there's a little gap there. You're going to find out that there's one of those things that are not a special district, and it's the benefit taxing. Okay, so you're going to see that. So what is a special district? Now, this is straight out of the statutes. It's a unit of local special purpose government. The board has policy-making powers, the board of the special district. It operates within limited boundaries. It's created by general law, special act, or local ordinance, or by the rule of the governor and cabinet. That's how they defined it. But they go on and say a special district is not general purpose government, so it's not city or county. It is not a school district. It is not a community college. It is not a municipal services tax or benefit unit. Okay? It's not the Seminole or Miccosukee tribe special improvements. It's not providing electoral services in a political municipality. So it sort of defines what special districts are. So remember, it's a unit of local special purpose government. The board can make decisions, operates within a limited boundary created by law, general law, local ordinance, rule of the governor. It's not schools. It's not community colleges. It's not municipal, as well as those others. So then it gets interesting because there's dependent special districts and independent special districts. So dependent special districts have at least one of the following characteristics. So dependent. Its governing body members are identical to the governing body members of a single county or municipality. So is anybody structured in here where you have arrangement where the Board of County Commissioners is also the library board? Anybody have any arrangement like that? Like there's a library district and they're a member of that, okay? Well, you do? Port Authority. Okay, and what county are you from? Citrus County. Okay, the Port Authority. So when you do that, you know, you're talking about, you got a dependent special district. In that case, it's identical to the Board of County Commissioners. Okay, so it's not, that's its characteristics. Its governing body members are appointed by the governing body of a single county or single municipality. So, you know, if you as a county commission or a single municipality appoints the members, then it's not going to be it's going to be a dependent district. Unexpired terms, you get to fill it. Budget requires approval by the Board of County Commission. How many of you have some type of dependent special district where you have to approve the budget? Okay, it's very common in Florida. Jack?
A lot of you do, and you might not be aware of it, is independent order districts, or independent order districts. If it's between 20 counties, sometimes you have a independent order district. Special districts also have liabilities to the county.
And then this is the one I like. Independent special districts, well, they just don't have any of the characteristics of special districts. So that always confuses me. A special district that includes more than one county is independent unless the special district lies wholly within the boundaries of a single municipality. Okay? So, you know, when I read this every year, when I read it or when I go back and review it, I think I need to go back to school and try to figure out what the speak is saying. So the question is, some of you know the answer, I've already said it. Every county is a member of at least one common independent special district in Florida, and the answer to that question is what? What's the independent special district that every county is a member of? Water management. Okay, think of the water management. It always helps me to think of an example to understand it. So how are the members of the water management district selected? Elected. And it's got ratcheted down a little bit, but do they have budget authority independently? They can tax. There's a small property tax that can go with it. Can they decide to spend the money that they collect in revenue or they get from the state? Yeah. Okay. So when I think of that, that's the easiest way for me to remember sort of what an independent special district looks like in Florida. Now, in the absence of that, I believe the governor can go ahead and fill the position to that. But, you know, it operates independently. It's not upon any single municipality or a group to do it. It's not within a small area. Special districts, generally created by the legislature, especially if they're independent. Governor and cabinet can do it. Community development districts are exception. Regional water supply authorities are exception. And a municipality can create a community development district. County may create the following. If you have any of these, just raise your hand real quick. Anybody got Children's Services District? And I put the statutory side in there. I don't say, how about a county health and mental health care district? Anybody got a special district on that? You have the authority to. County hospital district? There's a couple of those. Marion County's got one. So Marion County owns a hospital. If Janet Taylor was here from Hendry County, I think Janet's from, she would tell you here that that county has responsibility of the person from the grave, or from the time they were born to the grave. The county has a cemetery. They have health care starting at basically birth. So counties have a lot of responsibilities in that area. Community development districts. Any of you got community development districts? A lot of you ought to be holding up your hand. There's a lot of CDDs in Florida, okay? So on that one. You know, I asked this question, a lot of people act a little bit surprised. Do you know you can have regional jail districts in Florida? So any combination of 2 or more counties or municipalities can create a regional jail district. But I don't think there's any counties in Florida that are using them at all. Yeah. But that's a possibility. Regional water supply authorities, any combination of 2 or more counties, municipalities, or other political subdivisions may create. Again, you have opportunity. Is everybody here from Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco? Okay, there's regional water supply authority for that Bay Area. You know, there's a D-cell plant that's serving that area, so you can have those type districts as well. Here's why I say a lot of you ought to be holding up your hands. So there's total special districts in Florida. They think about 1,524. 66 are multi-county. 1,458 aren't. Independent special districts, 927. So there's independent special districts that have budget authority and spending authority and typically elected in the state of Florida. Now, not all the districts are from counties, but at least every county has one. The most, and even though they say a lot, Hillsborough County identified they had 131 special districts. That's a lot. And you can see how it's bigger in some of those urban counties and bigger in South Florida. Examples of special districts in Florida, I've listed them. So let's go down to the community development districts. I asked that specifically. 503, all CDs are independent special districts. Number has increased to 600, and over 430 were created between 2003 to 2008. And what happened during that time? Population was growing, and then we had the recession, and everything turned out. And now 168 of them were in default. Okay? But they're there. Community redevelopment. How many of you have a county community redevelopment project? How about a city in? So Escambia County is involved in everything I guess everybody else is. Yeah, so a lot of people have a community development, redevelopment thing. There's 180 of them in Florida. It says they're all dependent. What does that tell you? It's the municipality or the county board that's doing the same. They have budget authority over them and all that stuff.
Probably paying for CRAs and municipalities that you're not aware of, because municipalities establish a CRA a long time without permission.
Fire control and rescue, there's 68 of those. 93 housing authorities. Soil and water conservation. Anybody know what a soil and water conservation district is? Okay. Well, they're in Florida and they have elected representatives. Usually the counties don't give them any budget, or it's a very small. They don't have a bunch of budget Sanitary Authority. It comes through pass-throughs in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But there's 64 saltwater conservation districts in Florida. That's a lot. Water management that we talked about, 5, all independent, all multi-county, and every county's in one of them. So we can go on. A lot of you are involved with regional planning councils. I'm not going to say much about it. You've got the duties listed there and stuff like that. They've had a rough time over the last 2-3 years on getting budget from the state. And I don't know, I haven't heard that prospects look any better, but they're managed to keep going. In some counties, that may not make a huge difference if you have a large staff. If you're in a small county, if you need help with transportation planning systems or something like that, a regional planning council can be very valuable. When I came to Florida in January 1981, Florida was going through its growth management process, and you may not be familiar, but each county had to turn in a growth management plan. And so I don't know exactly how the state decided, but everybody has certain deadlines. You know, yours is due by this date. Somebody else's due was later. So I hadn't been here very long, and Hamilton County called me and they said, we don't have very much staff. We don't really understand the legislation. Can you come up and explain it to us, and can you help a little bit if our staff's having problems? I said I'd try. So I went up. Theirs was one in the first group due. Okay, guess whose was due at the same time? Reedy Creek Development District. And I know the Osceola County Commissioners know who that is, but what's the Reedy Creek Development District? That's Walt Disney World. When you drive into Walt Disney World and you see RD, RCD Fire Department, that's Reedy Creek Development, okay? That's an independent form of government. They don't report to Osceola County, they don't report to Orange County, they can do whatever the heck they want. They got attorneys out the wazoo, you know, and their plan in Hamilton County, who had a staff of probably 5, was same time. So, you know, it's a difficult task in meeting that. So regional planning councils has been a lifeline to many of the smaller counties. So I'm going to conclude this. I think I do have a couple more polling questions. So I think you have to ask yourself, what is your county's mission and goal for intergovernmental efforts? Is it to build relationships? Is it to provide technical information? Is it to lobby your viewpoints? Is it to have contact and influence? There's 1,000 things. What is or how should the county organize it? So how many people have paid staff who do intergovernmental relations? And that can include lobbying. How many have paid staff that do that? Okay, so when I look, that's mainly some of the larger areas. So I didn't see Columbia County holding up their hand. You did? You do have it? Okay, you have a paid staff person, and their job is to coordinate with all the groups in the community as well as go lobby the legislature. Okay? So, okay, a lot of counties have something like that. You know, you've got these more regional groups. So in some ways, the small county coalition operates in that way. They're a lobbying arm for the small counties in Florida. Okay? But you got to figure out how you're going to do it. Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to do it local? Or is it going to be in Tallahassee? There's some people who just employ contract lobbyists who are just in Tallahassee all the time. There's some counties that pay for their lobbyists to go to Tallahassee when they're in session. So it's different for everybody. What's your role and the board's role in the process? Full, part-time, priority, when needed, big issues only. I mean, those are some of the questions you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself also, where does it fit in my personal priority system with all the things I have to do? Now the question is timing important in intergovernmental relation efforts? And we brought it up, but this is what I want to reinforce. And the answer is yes, it's really important. So if you go back through the number of bills that are introduced, the number who actually make it to the floor, and the number, many of these things are multi-year efforts. Okay? The other point that was really key and critical in that is if you're doing your initial lobbying, and I think almost all legislative bodies have some meeting in the county. They have a legislative delegation meeting with the commissioners, anybody else in the community who wants to come in. But you constantly have to follow up and follow up and follow up, and you can't really do it, and it's probably not near as effective when they're in session or committee week. You've got to do the work when they're not. In fact, I've met over time with a lot of state representatives for a variety of reasons, and I've asked them. I said, when's most convenient to you? And they say, well, not during this time. I always take my vacation in August or whatever. This is my great time, and it's never during this session. Okay, I've experienced that a half a dozen times where that doesn't happen. But those are the type of questions you're going to have to start asking individually and collectively with your board. So those are some of the concluding thoughts. Now, these are just sort of evaluation stuff today. And I already know the answers, but I want to see what you think. So the first question is, did you learn something you didn't know? So I already know what the answer should be that because of all the 50-50 guesses we had. Okay, so if you just respond to that one real quick. And hopefully with some information that Becky and Latrez will be following up with you on, we can use this to improve the programs. And I am active with FACTS Curriculum Committee, and we do listen to what you say and try to go back and improve it every couple of years. So, you know, we need to know if you learned something you didn't know. So I've got 16 people who've responded. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, it's nice that you learned something new, but the more pertinent question is, I will consider the information presented today in my role as a county commissioner. Because we taught you something, but now the question is, do you see any application or you might change things that you're doing? So please respond to that one. Okay, and it looks like we're down to about 16 responses now, so I'm going to close that one. And then the last one. I'm not sure how I incorporate what I learned today into all the other things I need to do. And that's really an honest question, because I'm always overwhelmed when I look at all the responsibility you have, and I know that about 50% of you are also trying to do a second job. And then when your counties are big, and so let me ask you, let's just go back to 1980 when I moved to the state. What was Florida's population? About 9 million in 1980-81. So how many county commissioners did we have in the state of Florida? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 377, 378. Now our population is 19.9 million. How many commissioners do we have in the state of Florida? About 378. So your constituent services, the demand for services, the age distributions have changed tremendously. But we got the same number of county commissioners. That's a huge, huge task you have to face. So it's nice that you maybe learned something. It's nice that you think you may be able to apply something. But it's also important to know I'm not sure how I even incorporate what I learned today or how I place it into a priority. So I've got 14 responses on that. I'm going to go ahead and close that. So about 50-50 on that one. So some of you have already given it some thought, and some of you are saying, I'm not really sure. I'm going to close. I didn't put this up. It looks like I got you done 5 minutes before you needed to make it to the small county coalition stuff that you want. I appreciate the break went a little bit longer, but we've adjusted to get you out on time. We start back at 1:30. And we'll have a panel of people that you need ask a lot of questions of. So we'll have a couple county administrators. Jack Brown will be in there. We'll have a sheriff from a local county and his county administrator. So it's time to come and ask tough questions about this intergovernmental relationship and cooperation and stuff like that. It's always a popular session. You'll have about 90 minutes to quiz those folks. So be thinking about your questions. Have a good lunch. See you back here sharp at 1:30.